The morning air carried the sharp smell of gunpowder and metal as Sarah Martinez walked across the concrete floor of Precision Point shooting range. Her work boots made soft clicking sounds against the ground as she pushed the wheeled cart filled with fresh paper targets. At 23, she had been working at the range for almost 2 years, and the routine had become as natural as breathing. Sarah wore her usual uniform of dark jeans and a polo shirt with the range logo. Her long black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and protective glasses hung around her neck. She moved with quiet efficiency, checking each shooting lane and replacing torn targets with new ones. The morning shift was always peaceful, with only a few regular customers who came in early to practice before work. The range was located in a small military town outside San Diego, where many active duty and retired service members lived. Sarah had grown up here, watching her father struggle with nightmares and mood swings after his tours in Afghanistan. He never talked about what happened over there, but she saw how the war had changed him. Working at the shooting range felt like a small way to understand the world that had shaped so much of her childhood. As she hung a fresh target at the 50-yard line, Sarah heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see a man in his early 30s watching her work. He was tall and lean, with short brown hair and calm green eyes. There was something different about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that she had learned to recognize in military personnel. "Good morning," he said, his voice polite but reserved. "I called yesterday about range time. Name's Jake Morrison." Sarah nodded and walked back toward the counter. "Yes, I have you down for 2 hours on lane 7. You'll need to sign the waiver and show me your ID." Jake filled out the paperwork quickly, his handwriting neat and precise. Sarah noticed the military ID he showed her listed him as active duty Navy. Many of the customers were current or former military, so this was nothing unusual. What caught her attention was how quiet he seemed, almost withdrawn. "First time shooting here?" she asked as she processed his payment. "Yes. I just moved to the area." Jake's answer was short, and he avoided making eye contact. Sarah had seen this before, the careful distance that some service members kept, especially those who seemed to carry invisible weights. Her father had been the same way when he first came home. She handed Jake his lane assignment and safety equipment without pushing for more conversation. "Lane 7 is ready for you. The targets are fresh. Let me know if you need anything." Jake nodded his thanks and headed toward his assigned lane. Sarah watched him go, noting the slight tension in his shoulders and the way he scanned the room without seeming to look around. These were habits she recognized from living with her father. For the next hour, Sarah continued her morning routine while Jake practiced on lane 7. She could hear the steady rhythm of his shots, controlled, precise, professional. Unlike some customers who fired rapidly or seemed to be working through frustration, Jake's shooting had a meditative quality to it. Around 10 o'clock, more customers began arriving. Sarah was busy helping a new shooter understand the range rules when she heard Jake's voice behind her. "Excuse me, miss?" She turned to find Jake standing a few feet away, holding his rifle case. "I'm heading out, but I wanted to ask, do you know much about shooting?" Sarah was surprised by the question. "Some. My father taught me when I was younger, but I haven't practiced much lately." Jake seemed to consider this for a moment. "The reason I ask is that I noticed how you handle yourself around here. You're comfortable with firearms, and you pay attention to safety. That's not as common as it should be." "Thank you," Sarah said, unsure where the conversation was heading. "I'm wondering if you'd be interested in some training. Real training, I mean. Not just target practice." Jake's expression was serious but not unfriendly. "I teach marksmanship to military personnel, and I think you might have natural ability." Sarah felt a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. "Why would you want to teach me?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see him choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say I believe everyone should know how to protect themselves and the people they care about. Especially people who work around firearms every day." There was something in his tone that made Sarah think there was more to his offer than simple generosity. But there was also something genuine about him, despite his guarded manner. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Jake nodded and reached into his pocket, pulling out a business card. "My number's on there if you decide you're interested." No pressure. After Jake left, Sarah found herself thinking about his offer throughout the day. She had always been curious about precision shooting, partly because of her father's military background and partly because she spent so much time around firearms at work. But there had never been an opportunity to learn from someone with real expertise. That evening, Sarah sat at the kitchen table in the small apartment she shared with her father. David Martinez was 51 years old, with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at a local factory, a job that kept his hands busy but didn't challenge his mind the way his army career had. "How was work today, Mija?" he asked as they ate dinner. "Quiet morning, busier afternoon." "Dad, can I ask you something?" David looked up from his plate, and Sarah could see the automatic wariness that appeared whenever she asked serious questions. "What's on your mind?" "A customer today offered to teach me marksmanship." "Real marksmanship, not just casual shooting." "He's military, active duty Navy." David set down his fork, his expression becoming more alert. "What kind of training?" He didn't go into details. But he seemed to know what he was talking about, and he thought I might have ability for it. For a long moment, David was silent. Sarah could see him thinking, weighing something in his mind. Finally, he spoke. "What's his name?" "Jake Morrison." David nodded slowly. "If he's offering to teach you, he must have seen something. Military marksmanship training is serious business, not something people offer lightly. Do you think I should do it?" David looked at his daughter for a long time before answering. "I think you should learn every skill you can, especially if someone qualified is willing to teach you. The world can be a dangerous place, and knowledge is never a bad thing to have." Sarah was surprised by his answer. Her father had always been protective, sometimes overly so. She had expected him to be concerned about her getting involved in advanced firearms training. "You really think it's a good idea?" "I think you're smart enough to make your own decisions, and strong enough to handle whatever you choose to learn. If this Morrison guy is willing to invest time in teaching you, there's probably a good reason for it." That night, Sarah lay in bed thinking about Jake's offer. There had been something in his eyes when he spoke to her, a seriousness that went beyond casual interest in teaching marksmanship. She found herself wondering what his story was, what had brought him to their small town and their shooting range. The next morning, Sarah arrived at work early as usual. She was replacing targets when she heard the familiar sound of the front door opening. Turning around, she saw Jake walking toward the counter, carrying the same rifle case as yesterday. "Good morning," he said, his tone as reserved as before. "Morning. Lane 7 again?" "If it's available." As Sarah processed his paperwork, she found herself studying his face more carefully. There were fine lines around his eyes that suggested he had spent time squinting in bright sunlight, and a small scar on his left temple that was barely visible. His hands were steady and strong, with calluses that spoke of hard work and discipline. "I've been thinking about your offer," Sarah said as she handed him his lane assignment. Jake looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time since they had met. "And? I'm interested. But I want to understand what kind of training you're talking about." Jake was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could see him making some kind of decision. "I teach precision marksmanship, long-range shooting that requires understanding of ballistics, weather conditions, and equipment. It's the kind of training that military snipers receive." Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness and excitement. "Why would you want to teach that to someone like me?" "Because you have the temperament for it. You're observant, patient, and careful. Those are the most important qualities for precision shooting." Jake paused, then continued. "And because everyone deserves to know how to protect themselves and others when it matters." There was something in the way he said those last words that made Sarah think he was speaking from personal experience. But she didn't push for details. "When would we start?" "Whenever you're ready. I usually come in early morning or evening when the range is quieter. Better for concentration." Sarah nodded, feeling a mix of anticipation and nervousness. "Tomorrow morning?" "I get here at 7, and we don't usually have customers until after 8. "Tomorrow morning it is." As Jake headed toward his lane, Sarah found herself wondering what she was getting into. But there was also a sense of excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. Learning precision marksmanship seemed like stepping into a world she had only observed from the outside, a world that her father belonged to but had never shared with her. The rest of the day passed slowly, with Sarah's mind frequently drifting to thoughts of the next morning's training session. She found herself paying closer attention to Jake's shooting, noting the deliberate pace and the long pauses between shots. This was clearly different from the casual target practice she was used to seeing. When Jake finished his session and prepared to leave, he stopped by the counter one more time. "Tomorrow we'll start with basics, position, breathing, trigger control. Wear comfortable clothes that you can move in, and bring water. We'll be working for about an hour." Sarah nodded, appreciating his professional approach. "I'll be ready." After Jake left, Sarah spent the rest of her shift thinking about the next morning. Part of her wondered if she was making a mistake, getting involved in something she didn't fully understand. But a larger part of her was excited about the opportunity to learn from someone who clearly knew his craft. That evening, she told her father about the planned training session. "He's going to teach you military-style marksmanship?" David asked, looking thoughtful. "Starting with basics. Position, breathing, trigger control." David nodded approvingly. "Those are the fundamentals. If he starts with those, he knows what he's doing. Just remember, precision shooting is as much mental as physical. It requires discipline and focus." "Did you do much long-range shooting in the Army?" David's expression became distant for a moment. "Some. It's a useful skill to have." Sarah could see that her father wasn't going to elaborate, which was typical when the conversation touched on his military experience. But his approval of Jake's training methods gave her more confidence about the next morning. As she prepared for bed, Sarah found herself both nervous and excited about what she would learn. She had spent 2 years working around firearms, but always as an observer and facilitator for others. Tomorrow, she would step into the role of student, learning skills that could change how she understood precision and discipline. She fell asleep that night thinking about steady breathing and controlled trigger pulls, wondering if she really had the natural ability that Jake seemed to think he had seen in her. Tomorrow morning would be the beginning of finding out. Sarah arrived at Precision Point 15 minutes earlier than usual the next morning, her stomach tight with nervous energy. She had barely slept, alternating between excitement and worry about whether she would embarrass herself during her first real marksmanship lesson. The parking lot was empty except for Jake's black pickup truck, which was already there when she pulled in. Inside the range, she found Jake setting up equipment at Lane 7. He had laid out a shooting mat, a small notebook, and what appeared to be a different rifle than he had used the day before. This one looked more complex, with a large scope and a bipod attached to the barrel. "Good morning," Jake said, looking up from his preparations. "Ready to get started?" Sarah nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. "What's different about that rifle?" "This is a bolt-action precision rifle, chambered in .308 Winchester. It's designed for accuracy at longer distances than what most people shoot here." Jake's explanation was matter-of-fact and professional. "But we're not starting with this today. First, we need to work on your fundamentals with something simpler." Jake led her to a different part of the range where he had set up a basic .22 caliber rifle on his shooting bench. Precision marksmanship starts with perfect fundamentals. If your position, breathing, and trigger control aren't consistent, all the expensive equipment in the world won't help you. For the next 30 minutes, Jake walked Sarah through proper shooting position. He showed her how to position her body behind the rifle, how to grip the stock, and how to align her sight picture. His teaching style was patient but demanding. He would correct small mistakes immediately and have her repeat movements until they became natural. "Shooting precisely isn't about being strong or fast," Jake explained as he adjusted Sarah's elbow position. "It's about being perfectly consistent. Every shot should be identical to the one before it." Sarah found herself appreciating Jake's attention to detail. He noticed things she never would have thought about: the way she tilted her head slightly to the left, how she tensed her shoulders when concentrating, the small inconsistencies in how she positioned her hands. "Now we'll work on breathing," Jake said once he was satisfied with her position. "Your breathing pattern affects everything else. Watch." Jake demonstrated the proper breathing technique for precision shooting, taking a deep breath, letting half of it out, then holding while taking the shot. He explained how the body's natural movement from breathing could throw off accuracy, and why timing the shot during the natural respiratory pause was crucial. "Try it without ammunition first. Just practice the breathing pattern while dry firing." Sarah spent several minutes practicing the breathing technique, focusing on the rhythm Jake had shown her. She was surprised by how much concentration it required to coordinate her breathing with the trigger pull.
Good. Now let's add ammunition.
Jake loaded 5 rounds into the rifle and positioned a target at 25 yards, much closer than Sarah was used to seeing for precision work, but Jake explained that they were focusing on technique rather than distance.
Take your time with each shot. There's no rush.
Focus on your breathing, your sight picture, and a smooth trigger pull.
Sarah's first shot hit the target but was several inches off center.
She felt a flash of disappointment, but Jake's response was encouraging.
That wasn't bad for a first shot with proper technique. What do you think went wrong?
Sarah thought about the shot, replaying it in her mind. I think I rushed the trigger pull. I was focused on my breathing, but I didn't pay enough attention to squeezing smoothly.
Exactly right.
That kind of self-analysis is crucial for improvement.
Try again.
The second shot was better, closer to the center of the target. Jake had her continue with the remaining 3 rounds, taking time between each shot to think about what she was doing.
You're a natural at this, Jake said as they examined the target.
Look at this group, all 5 shots within a 3-inch circle.
That's impressive for someone learning proper technique.
Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with surprise. She had always enjoyed shooting casually with her father, but she had never realized she might have real aptitude for precision work. What makes the difference between someone who can shoot well casually and someone who can do precision marksmanship, she asked.
Jake considered the question carefully. Mental discipline, mostly.
Casual shooting is about having fun and hitting targets reasonably well. Precision marksmanship is about being able to make the exact same shot over and over again, regardless of conditions or pressure. As they continued the session, Jake began sharing more about the mental aspects of precision shooting. He talked about visualization, about the importance of building consistent routines, and about learning to shoot well under stress.
Why is shooting under stress important? Sarah asked.
Jake was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see that familiar guarded expression return to his face.
Because in real situations, you don't get to shoot when everything is perfect. You need to be able to perform when it matters most.
There was something in his tone that made Sarah think he was speaking from personal experience, but she didn't push for details.
Instead, she focused on absorbing everything he was teaching her.
After an hour of intensive training, Jake began packing up the equipment.
That's enough for today.
You did well, better than most people do in their first precision shooting lesson.
When can we do this again?
Sarah asked, surprised by how much she had enjoyed the challenge.
How about the same time tomorrow?
We'll continue working on fundamentals, and if you're ready, we might move to longer distances.
As Jake prepared to leave, Sarah found herself curious about his background. Can I ask what kind of marksmanship you do in the Navy?
Jake paused in his packing, and Sarah could see him deciding how much to share.
I'm what's called a designated marksman.
I provide precision fire support for my team.
Sarah nodded, sensing that this was as much detail as Jake was comfortable sharing.
But it helped explain his expertise and his serious approach to training. The rest of the morning passed quickly as regular customers began arriving at the range. Sarah found herself thinking about the lesson throughout the day, replaying Jake's instructions and already looking forward to the next session. During her lunch break, she called her father at work.
How did the marksmanship lesson go? David asked. Better than I expected. He said I'm a natural at it.
Sarah could hear pride in her father's voice when he responded.
I'm not surprised. You've always been good at anything that requires focus and attention to detail. Dad, can I ask you something? This instructor, Jake Morrison, he's a designated marksman in the Navy. What does that mean, exactly?
David was quiet for a moment.
It means he's specially trained to provide precise, long-range fire support for his unit.
It's a specialized role that requires extensive training and skill.
Is it dangerous work?
All military work can be dangerous, Mija. But designated marksmen are often in positions where they need to make critical shots under pressure.
It requires someone with exceptional skill and mental toughness. This conversation gave Sarah new perspective on Jake's reserved demeanor and his emphasis on shooting under stress.
She found herself wondering what kind of situations he had faced in his military career. That evening, Sarah spent time researching precision marksmanship online, wanting to understand more about what Jake was teaching her. She read about ballistics, different types of precision rifles, and the mental disciplines required for long-range shooting. The more she learned, the more impressed she became with Jake's teaching approach. Everything he had shown her aligned with what professional marksmanship instructors recommended, but he had simplified it in a way that made it accessible for a beginner. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the range eager for her second lesson. Jake was already there, setting up equipment that looked more advanced than what they had used the day before. "Today we're going to work on longer distances and environmental factors," Jake announced as Sarah approached. "But first, let's see how much you retained from yesterday." Jake had Sarah repeat the fundamental exercises from the previous day: position, breathing, and trigger control. He made small corrections, but Sarah could tell he was pleased with her consistency. "Good. You've been practicing the breathing technique." Sarah smiled. "I've been practicing dry firing at home too, just working on the trigger pull." "Excellent. That kind of dedication will make a real difference in your progress." Jake led her to a shooting position that faced targets at 50 yards, twice the distance they had used the day before. The rifle he had set up was the same .308 precision rifle she had seen him preparing the previous morning. "This is a bigger step up," Jake explained. "The rifle has more power and recoil, and the longer distance means that small mistakes become much more obvious." Jake spent time explaining the rifle's features: the adjustable stock, the precision trigger, and the high magnification scope. He showed Sarah how to properly adjust the scope for her eye relief and how to use the scope's reticle for range estimation. "At longer distances, you need to account for environmental factors," Jake continued. "Wind, humidity, temperature, they all affect where your bullet will hit." Jake pulled out a small device that looked like a weather station. "This measures wind speed and direction. At 50 yards, wind won't make a huge difference, but it's important to start learning how to read conditions." Sarah found this aspect of precision shooting fascinating: the way that tiny environmental changes could affect accuracy, and the mental calculations required to compensate for them. Jake had her take several shots at the 50-yard target, coaching her through each one. The increased distance and rifle power made the shooting more challenging, but Sarah found that the fundamentals Jake had taught her the day before still applied. "Your third shot was perfect," Jake observed, looking through a spotting scope. "Dead center." Sarah felt a rush of satisfaction. Making a precise shot at 50 yards with proper technique felt like a real accomplishment. "How do you stay so calm when you're shooting?" Sarah asked. "You make it look effortless." Jake was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could see him considering his answer. "Experience helps. But mostly it's about accepting that you can't control everything. You can only control your technique and your mental state. Everything else is just variables to account for." "Is that something you learned in the military?" "Among other places." Jake's answer was brief, but Sarah sensed there were stories behind it that he wasn't ready to share. As the lesson continued, Jake began introducing Sarah to more advanced concepts: reading wind indicators, adjusting for different lighting conditions, and maintaining consistent shooting routines even when conditions changed. "Why do you keep emphasizing routines?" Sarah asked. "Because in high-stress situations, you fall back on your training. If you don't have consistent routines, your performance becomes unpredictable." Jake paused, then added, "Consistency is what separates good shooters from great ones." Near the end of the session, Jake had Sarah take a shot at a target at 75 yards, the longest distance she had ever attempted with precision technique. "Take your time. Use everything we've worked on. Don't worry about the result, focus on perfect technique." Sarah settled into position, going through the mental checklist Jake had taught her. Position, breathing, sight picture, smooth trigger pull. The shot felt good as soon as she took it. "Outstanding," Jake said, looking through the spotting scope. "That's within 2 inches of dead center at 75 yards. Sarah felt a surge of pride and excitement. "I can't believe I just did that." "You did it because you followed proper technique and stayed focused. That's what precision marksmanship is about: trusting your training and executing consistently." As they packed up the equipment, Jake turned to Sarah with a more serious expression. "I want to ask you something. How committed are you to learning this seriously?" Sarah was surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you interested in casual lessons a couple of times a week, or do you want to really develop advanced skills? Because if you're serious about it, I can teach you things that go well beyond basic marksmanship." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What kind of advanced skills? Long-range shooting, shooting in various weather conditions, shooting under pressure. The kind of training that produces real expertise. Sarah found herself nodding before she had fully considered the implications. Yes. I want to learn everything you're willing to teach me. Jake studied her face for a moment, seeming to evaluate her commitment. All right. But understand that advanced training is demanding. It requires dedication and mental toughness. Are you sure you're ready for that? I'm sure. Good. Tomorrow we'll start working on longer ranges and more challenging conditions. But first, I want you to do something for me. What's that? Talk to your father about what we're doing. Really talk to him. I think he might have insights about marksmanship training that would be valuable for you. Sarah was puzzled by the request. Why do you think that? Jake shouldered his rifle case and looked at her seriously. Because military experience teaches you things about precision shooting that civilian training usually doesn't cover. And I suspect your father learned some of those lessons. As Jake left the range, Sarah found herself thinking about his suggestion. Her father had always been reluctant to talk about his military experiences, but maybe approaching it from the angle of marksmanship training would be different. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks, but Sarah's mind kept returning to the morning's lesson and Jake's offer to teach her advanced skills. She was beginning to understand that precision marksmanship was about much more than just shooting accurately. It was a discipline that required mental toughness, consistency under pressure, and a deep understanding of how small variables could affect outcomes. That evening, Sarah decided to take Jake's advice and have a real conversation with her father about marksmanship and military training. That evening, Sarah found her father in his workshop behind their apartment, cleaning his old army rifle. David kept the weapon in perfect condition even though he rarely shot it anymore. The workshop was small but organized, filled with tools and equipment he used for his various projects. The smell of gun oil and metal polish hung in the air. Dad, can we talk about something? David looked up from the rifle, noting the serious tone in his daughter's voice. Of course. What's on your mind? Sarah pulled up a stool and sat across from her father. My marksmanship instructor suggested I talk to you about military shooting experience. He thinks you might have insights that would help with my training. David set down the cleaning rod and studied his daughter's face. Sarah could see him weighing his words, the same careful consideration he always showed when military topics came up. What kind of training is he giving you? Advanced precision marksmanship. Long-range shooting, environmental factors, shooting under pressure. He said my training needs to go beyond civilian marksmanship if I want to be truly skilled. David was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see memories playing behind his eyes. Finally, he spoke. Military marksmanship training teaches you things that civilian shooting doesn't cover. It's not just about hitting targets accurately, it's about being able to perform when lives depend on your shot. What do you mean? David picked up a cloth and began wiping down the rifle's receiver, his movements careful and practiced. In combat, you don't get perfect conditions. You might be tired, scared, under fire, or dealing with equipment problems. The training has to prepare you for those realities. Sarah felt a chill as she began to understand what her father was talking about. Did you do much precision shooting in Afghanistan? David's hands stilled for a moment, then resumed cleaning the rifle. Some. I was primarily infantry, but all soldiers receive marksmanship training. And, in Afghanistan, sometimes you need to make precise shots at distance. What was different about shooting in actual combat compared to training? David set down the rifle and looked directly at his daughter. Everything. The adrenaline, the pressure of knowing that missing could mean your friends get hurt, the environmental factors you can't control. Training tries to simulate those conditions, but nothing really prepares you for the real thing. Sarah found herself thinking about Jake's emphasis on shooting under stress and maintaining consistent routines. My instructor keeps talking about consistency and mental discipline. Is that what you mean? Exactly. When everything goes wrong, you fall back on your training. If your fundamentals aren't absolutely solid, you'll fail when it matters most. David paused, then continued. Your instructor sounds like he knows what he's talking about. Dad, can I ask you something personal? David nodded, though Sarah could see him tense slightly.
Do you think the shooting skills you learned in the military helped you in other ways? I mean, beyond just combat? David considered the question for a long time.
When he finally answered, his voice was thoughtful. Marksmanship training teaches you discipline, patience, and the ability to perform under pressure. Those skills transfer to other parts of life. But they also come with responsibilities.
What kind of responsibilities?
When you develop real skill with weapons, you have to think seriously about when and why you would use those skills.
It's not just about being able to shoot accurately, it's about understanding the weight of what that ability means.
Sarah felt the gravity of what her father was saying. She was beginning to understand that the training Jake was offering her was about much more than sport shooting or self-defense.
Do you think I should continue with the advanced training?
David looked at his daughter with a mix of pride and concern. I think you're mature enough to handle the responsibility that comes with advanced skills.
And I think having those skills could be valuable.
But you need to understand that once you develop them, you can't unknow what you've learned.
That night, Sarah lay in bed thinking about her conversation with her father.
She was beginning to understand that Jake's training was preparing her for scenarios she had never seriously considered.
The idea was both exciting and sobering. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the range to find Jake setting up equipment she hadn't seen before.
There was a chronograph for measuring bullet velocity, additional weather monitoring equipment, and targets placed at distances up to 200 yards. Today we're going to work on real long-range shooting, Jake announced.
Everything we've done so far has been preparation for this.
Jake spent the first 30 minutes explaining ballistics in detail, how bullets are affected by gravity, wind, air density, and temperature. He showed Sarah ballistic charts and explained how to calculate holds and adjustments for different distances. This is where precision marksmanship becomes as much science as skill, Jake explained. You need to understand the physics of what's happening to your bullet from the moment it leaves the barrel until it hits the target.
Sarah found herself fascinated by the complexity of long-range shooting.
She had never realized how many variables affected bullet flight, or how precise the calculations needed to be for accurate shooting at distance. Now let's put theory into practice, Jake said, leading her to a shooting position facing the 200-yard target line.
This is where everything we've worked on becomes critical.
Jake had Sarah take several shots at 100 yards first, ensuring that her fundamentals remained solid at the increased distance. Then, they moved to 150 yards, and, finally, to 200 yards.
At 200 yards, Sarah's first shot missed the target entirely.
She felt a flash of frustration, but Jake's response was calm and analytical.
What do you think went wrong? Sarah thought about the shot, replaying her technique and the environmental conditions. I think I didn't account enough for the wind. It felt stronger than when we started. Good analysis.
Wind is the most difficult variable to read accurately.
Let's work on that.
Jake spent the next 20 minutes teaching Sarah to read wind indicators, the movement of grass, leaves, and mirage effects. He showed her how wind speed and direction could change between her position and the target, and how to estimate the effects on bullet trajectory. Wind reading is an art as much as a science, Jake explained. It takes experience and practice to get good at it.
But the principles we're learning will give you a foundation. Sarah's second shot at 200 yards hit the target, though not in the center.
Her third shot was much better, and, by her fifth shot, she was consistently hitting within a 6-inch circle. That's outstanding progress, Jake said, examining the target through binoculars.
Most people take months to shoot that well at 200 yards.
It's more challenging than I expected, but I love the problem-solving aspect of it, Sarah replied. Every shot requires thinking about so many variables.
That's exactly the right attitude. Precision marksmanship is puzzle-solving under pressure.
As they continued the session, Jake began introducing Sarah to shooting positions other than prone. He showed her how to shoot from a sitting position, from behind cover, and how to use improvised shooting supports.
Why are these positions important? Sarah asked as she struggled to find stability in the sitting position.
Because in real situations, you don't always get to shoot from a perfect prone position on a shooting mat. You need to be able to adapt to whatever conditions you find yourself in.
Jake's mention of real situations reminded Sarah of her conversation with her father the night before. Can I ask you something?
Jake looked up from adjusting the target.
Sure.
My father said that military marksmanship is different from civilian shooting because it's about being able to perform when lives depend on your shot.
Is that what you're preparing me for?
Jake was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see him choosing his words carefully. I'm teaching you skills that could be valuable in many different situations. Self-defense, sport shooting, hunting, or other scenarios where precision matters. Sarah sensed that Jake was being deliberately vague, but she didn't push for more specific answers. Instead, she focused on absorbing everything he was teaching her. As the session progressed, Jake introduced Sarah to shooting under simulated stress conditions. He had her do physical exercise before shooting, shoot with time limits, and shoot while dealing with equipment problems. This is where mental discipline becomes crucial, Jake explained as Sarah prepared for a stress shooting exercise. Your technique has to remain consistent even when your heart rate is elevated and you're dealing with pressure. The stress shooting was significantly more challenging than Sarah expected. Her heart rate was elevated from the physical exercise, and the time pressure made her want to rush her shots. But she found that focusing on the breathing and trigger control techniques Jake had taught her helped her maintain some consistency. Not bad for your first attempt at stress shooting, Jake said after examining her target. You maintained decent accuracy even under pressure. That's a good sign. Near the end of the session, Jake had Sarah attempt her longest shot yet, 250 yards. The target looked impossibly small through the scope, and Sarah felt nervous about even hitting the target, let alone shooting accurately. At this distance, everything matters, Jake coached. Position, breathing, trigger control, wind reading, ballistic calculation. But don't overthink it, trust your training and execute. Sarah went through her mental checklist methodically, taking time with each element. The shot felt good, and she was rewarded with Jake's approval. Dead center. That's an exceptional shot for someone with your level of experience. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with amazement. I can't believe I just made a precision shot at 250 yards. You made that shot because you followed proper technique and trusted your training. That's what real marksmanship is about. As they packed up the equipment, Jake turned to Sarah with a serious expression. You've progressed faster than anyone I've ever trained. You have natural ability, but, more importantly, you have the mental discipline for this work. Thank you. I've never done anything that challenged me like this. I want to ask you something, Jake continued. How would you feel about entering a precision rifle competition? There's a local match next month that would be good experience for you. Sarah felt excited and nervous at the same time. Do you think I'm ready for competition? I think you're ready to start learning about competitive shooting. It's different from training, but it's valuable experience. And I think you'd do well. I'd like to try it. Jake nodded approvingly. Good. Competition will teach you things about shooting under pressure that training alone can't provide. As Jake prepared to leave, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed since that first morning when he had offered to teach her marksmanship. She was learning skills she had never imagined having, and discovering capabilities in herself that surprised her. Jake, can I ask you one more question? Sure. Why did you offer to train me? I mean, really why? Jake was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see him struggling with how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke. Because I believe people should have the ability to protect themselves and others. And because you reminded me of someone who deserved better training than they received. There was something painful in Jake's expression as he said this, and Sarah sensed there was a story behind his words that he wasn't ready to share. But his answer gave her insight into his motivation for teaching her. That afternoon, Sarah found herself thinking about Jake's offer to enter her in a competition. The idea was both exciting and intimidating. She had been training for less than a week, but already she could feel how much the marksmanship training was affecting her confidence and self-image. That evening, she told her father about the competition opportunity. He wants to enter you in a precision rifle match after less than a week of training? David asked, looking surprised. He said I progressed faster than anyone he's ever trained, but I do think you should understand what you're getting into. What do you mean? Advanced marksmanship skills come with responsibilities. Once you develop them, people will see you differently. And you'll see yourself differently too. Sarah was beginning to understand what her father meant. The training with Jake was changing her in ways that went beyond just learning to shoot accurately. She was developing confidence, discipline, and capabilities that were affecting how she thought about herself and her place in the world. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah thought about the competition and what it would mean to test her skills against experienced shooters. Part of her was nervous about the challenge, but a larger part was excited about the opportunity to see how much she had learned and what she was capable of achieving. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself at Mountain Valley Shooting Complex, a larger facility 2 hours north of their town. The precision rifle competition Jake had entered her in was already underway, with dozens of competitors setting up elaborate shooting positions and expensive equipment. Sarah felt simultaneously excited and overwhelmed as she surveyed the scene. "Stay focused on your own shooting," Jake advised as they walked toward the registration table.
"Don't worry about other people's equipment or experience.
You have the skills, now you just need to trust them."
Sarah nodded, trying to calm her nerves.
Over the past 3 weeks, Jake had intensified her training significantly. They had worked on shooting in various weather conditions, shooting from improvised positions, and dealing with equipment malfunctions. Most importantly, Jake had taught her mental techniques for maintaining focus under pressure. The competition format was straightforward but challenging. Shooters would engage targets at distances from 100 to 600 yards, with points awarded for accuracy and time penalties for exceeding shooting time limits. Sarah would be competing in the beginner class, but even that included shooters with months or years of experience. "Remember what we've practiced about pre-shot routines," Jake said as they approached the first shooting position.
"Consistency is what will separate you from less disciplined shooters."
Sarah's first target was at 200 yards, a distance she now felt confident with thanks to Jake's training. She went through her mental checklist methodically: equipment check, position establishment, breathing rhythm, sight picture, trigger control. The shot broke cleanly, and she was rewarded with a hit in the high-scoring ring.
"Perfect start," Jake observed quietly. "Keep that same approach for every shot."
As the competition progressed, Sarah found herself settling into a rhythm. The training Jake had given her in stress shooting proved valuable as she dealt with time pressure and the awareness of other competitors around her. Most importantly, the mental discipline he had emphasized allowed her to focus on her own performance rather than being distracted by external factors. At the 300-yard line, Sarah encountered her first real challenge. The wind conditions were tricky, with gusts coming from multiple directions. She took extra time reading the wind indicators, applying the techniques Jake had taught her about estimating wind effects on bullet trajectory. Her first shot at 300 yards hit slightly left of center, a good shot, but not perfect. Sarah adjusted her wind hold slightly for the second shot, which resulted in a near-perfect hit. The third shot was dead center, drawing approving nods from nearby competitors who had been watching her performance. "Outstanding wind reading," commented an older shooter positioned next to Sarah. "You're shooting like someone with years of experience." Jake smiled at the compliment but kept his coaching focused and brief.
"That's what good training produces. Stay focused on the process."
The 400-yard stage proved more challenging.
At this distance, small errors in technique or wind reading were magnified significantly.
Sarah's first shot missed the target entirely, sailing high and right. She felt a moment of panic, but Jake's calm voice brought her back to focus.
"Analyze what happened. Don't just react emotionally."
Sarah thought about the shot, considering her sight picture, trigger control, and environmental factors. "I think I jerked the trigger slightly, and I may have underestimated the wind from the right."
Good analysis. Make the corrections and trust your next shot. Sarah's second shot at 400 yards hit the target, though not in the center.
Her third and fourth shots were progressively better as she adjusted to the conditions and regained her confidence. During a break between stages, Sarah overheard a conversation between two experienced competitors that gave her new perspective on her performance. "That young woman over there is impressive," one of them said, gesturing toward Sarah.
"She's shooting like someone with serious training, not like a typical beginner."
"Yeah, I've been watching her technique.
Whoever taught her knows what they're doing. Her fundamentals are textbook perfect."
Sarah felt a surge of pride, both in her own performance and in validation of Jake's teaching methods. She was beginning to understand that the discipline and consistency Jake had emphasized were setting her apart from shooters who relied primarily on experience or expensive equipment. The 500-yard stage represented the longest distance Sarah had ever shot in competition. The target looked impossibly small through her scope, and she could feel her heart rate increasing with nervousness. Jake sensed her anxiety and provided calming guidance. You've made this shot in practice multiple times.
Nothing has changed except the environment. Trust your training.
Sarah went through her extended pre-shot routine, taking extra time with wind reading and ballistic calculations. The first shot felt good as soon as she took it, and she was rewarded with a solid hit in the scoring rings. Perfect execution, Jake said with obvious satisfaction.
That shot demonstrated everything we've worked on.
The final stage was at 600 yards, a distance Sarah had never attempted before, even in training. Jake had prepared her for this possibility by emphasizing that competition would sometimes push her beyond her comfort zone.
This is where mental toughness matters most, Jake coached. Don't think about the difficulty of the shot.
Focus on perfect technique and trust the outcome.
Sarah's approach to the 600-yard target was methodical and careful.
She took extra time with her setup, double-checked her scope adjustments, and spent several minutes reading wind conditions. When she finally took the shot, she felt confident in her technique even though the distance was intimidating.
The shot hit the target, though not in the center.
For a first attempt at 600 yards under competition pressure, it was a respectable result that drew appreciation from other competitors.
When the scores were tallied, Sarah finished third in the beginner class, an outstanding result that surprised even Jake.
More importantly, her shooting had been consistent throughout the competition, demonstrating the value of the mental discipline and technical fundamentals Jake had emphasized.
I'm proud of your performance today, Jake said as they packed up their equipment. You shot like someone who understands what precision marksmanship is really about.
I couldn't have done it without your training, Sarah replied. 3 weeks ago, I never would have imagined I could compete at this level. You had the natural ability. I just helped you develop the discipline and technique to use it properly. As they drove back home, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed since that first morning when Jake had offered to teach her marksmanship. She had discovered capabilities in herself that she never knew existed, and developed confidence that extended beyond just shooting.
Jake, can I ask you something personal?
Jake glanced at her, then returned his attention to the road.
What do you want to know?
Earlier you mentioned that I reminded you of someone who deserved better training than they received.
Can you tell me about that?
Jake was quiet for a long time, and Sarah could see him weighing how much to share. Finally, he spoke, his voice careful and controlled.
I had a teammate a few years ago.
She was assigned to our unit without adequate marksmanship training, but she had natural abilities similar to yours.
We didn't have time to train her properly before we deployed.
Jake paused, and Sarah could sense the emotional weight behind his words. She was killed in Afghanistan because she wasn't prepared for a situation that required precise shooting under extreme pressure.
Good training might have made the difference.
Sarah felt a chill as she began to understand the personal motivation behind Jake's intensive training methods.
I'm sorry. That must have been terrible.
It taught me that natural ability without proper training can be worse than no ability at all. When someone has potential, they need to be prepared for situations where that potential might be the difference between life and death.
The conversation gave Sarah new insight into Jake's character and his commitment to thorough training.
She was beginning to understand that his teaching went beyond sport shooting or self-defense. He was preparing her for scenarios where precision and mental toughness could be critical.
That evening, Sarah told her father about the competition results and her conversation with Jake.
He's carrying guilt about a teammate who was killed, David observed after hearing the story. That explains his intensity about training and mental preparation.
Do you think his training has been appropriate for me? David considered the question carefully.
I think he's taught you valuable skills and discipline that will serve you well in many areas of life. And I think understanding the serious applications of those skills is part of being responsible with them. Over the following weeks, Jake continued Sarah's training but with a different focus. Instead of just working on technical shooting skills, he began emphasizing the mental aspects of performance under pressure and the ethical considerations that came with advanced marksmanship abilities.
Real marksmanship isn't just about hitting targets, Jake explained during one session.
It's about understanding when and why you would use these skills, and being prepared to make difficult decisions under pressure. Jake's training began incorporating scenarios that required Sarah to make quick decisions about target identification and engagement criteria. These exercises emphasized the importance of mental discipline and ethical decision-making under stress. Why are these decision-making exercises important?
Sarah asked after completing a particularly challenging scenario.
Because in real situations, technical skill is only part of what's required. You also need the judgment to know when and how to use your abilities responsibly. As Sarah's training progressed, she began to understand that Jake had been preparing her for more than recreational shooting. The skills he had taught her, precision under pressure, decision-making under stress, and mental discipline, had applications that extended far beyond sport competition.
3 months after their first lesson, Jake approached Sarah with a proposal that surprised her.
"I'm being transferred to a new assignment," he announced. "But, before I leave, I want to offer you an opportunity."
"What kind of opportunity?"
"There's a civilian contractor position available that provides marksmanship training to military and law enforcement personnel. They're looking for someone with your skills and teaching potential." Sarah felt excitement and nervousness at the same time.
"You think I'm qualified for something like that?"
"I think you have the technical skills and the mental discipline for it. More importantly, I think you understand the responsibility that comes with these abilities." The offer represented a career opportunity Sarah had never imagined. It would mean leaving her job at the shooting range and entering a world she had only glimpsed through Jake's training.
"Would you recommend me for the position?"
"I already have. The question is whether you're interested in pursuing it." That evening, Sarah sat with her father discussing Jake's offer. "It's an opportunity to use the skills you've developed in a meaningful way," David observed.
"Teaching others could be very rewarding. Are you comfortable with me getting more involved in this world?"
David looked at his daughter with obvious pride. "You've proven that you can handle the responsibility that comes with advanced skills. I trust your judgment about how to use them." Sarah realized that Jake's training had changed her in fundamental ways. She had developed not just marksmanship skills, but confidence, discipline, and a sense of responsibility that affected every aspect of her life. The next morning, Sarah found Jake at the range for what might be their final training session together. "I've decided to pursue the contractor position," she announced. Jake smiled, the first completely relaxed smile Sarah had seen from him.
"I thought you might.
You have the potential to be an exceptional instructor. I want to thank you for everything you've taught me. It's changed my life in ways I never expected."
"You were ready to learn.
I just provided the opportunity." As they conducted their final training session, Sarah reflected on the journey from that first morning when she had been simply resetting targets. Jake's offer to teach her marksmanship had led to discovering capabilities she never knew she had, developing discipline that extended far beyond shooting, and finding a career path that would allow her to pass those skills on to others. 6 months later, Sarah was working as a civilian marksmanship instructor, teaching precision shooting to military personnel and law enforcement officers. The skills Jake had taught her, technical proficiency, mental discipline, and understanding of the responsibilities that came with advanced abilities, served her well in her new role. She still thought often about Jake and the teammate he had lost, understanding now that his intensive training had been motivated by a desire to ensure that others would be prepared for situations where their skills might make the difference between life and death. Sarah had gone from resetting targets to becoming someone who prepared others for the most challenging and critical shooting scenarios they might face. It was a responsibility she took seriously, always remembering Jake's emphasis on the ethical obligations that came with advanced marksmanship abilities. The transformation from range employee to professional instructor represented more than just a career change. It reflected the development of confidence, discipline, and capabilities that had fundamentally changed how Sarah saw herself and her place in the world. Jake's training had prepared her not just to shoot accurately, but to understand the full weight of what those abilities meant and how to use them responsibly.